Fort Worth mayoral candidate Mattie Parker, thank you so much for joining us. So let me just ask you, why are you running for mayor?
It's a great question, Jack. So I am running for mayor to be the future and vision of the city. I know that Fort Worth, Texas is positioned for greatness, soon to be the 12th largest city in the country, which is hard for us Fort Worthians to believe. I want to bring a uniting voice of leadership that listens to all communities, but at the same time sort of holds on to what we know is making Fort Worth special, and also ensuring that we take off. That proverbial taking off means economically, education, from a infrastructure standpoint, all the things that we know a strong city needs to have. I'm prepared to do that after really 17 years in public service. So I'm excited about the opportunity, and I've loved campaigning and getting to meet people that I think share the same optimism about our community as I do.
So what separates you from the other candidates? In other words, why should the public, why should Fort Worth citizens vote for you instead of the others?
Well, let me first by saying I'm not running against anyone. I am running for Fort Worth to cast a vision of opportunity that I think resonates with all Fort Worth. So I think the three things that I've communicated to folks across Fort Worth are this. It's about leadership, it's about experience, and it's about authenticity in that leadership. So when it comes to experience, I honestly didn't expect this to be a next opportunity for me to take on. But as I mentioned briefly before, for 17 years, I have served in public service, state, federal, and local. I've been a practicing attorney. I'm a mom of three children. I know Fort Worth very well. I know the issues we're facing, both good and bad. And I think that experience will absolutely be a huge asset as we lead this city forward. In leadership, those that have worked with me for years can attest to this. I think actions speak louder than words. Um, Leadership doesn't always mean the person that is, pounding the pavement or rather pounding your desk and making a big scene. It's more about that ability to bring people together, to listen to all sides of something and actually make change and focus on solutions. I remind people that the mayor of Fort Worth, it is a nonpartisan election, and that's intentional for a reason, because I believe the strongest leaders are those that can bring all types of folks together, because every given Tuesday, you have to have 5 votes on a variety of different issues, soon to be 7 with redistricting. And if you've taken to your proverbial political corner, you will be alone in that. And you must focus on what it looks like to bring different perspectives to move the city forward. And the last thing is authenticity. So I'm a small town kid from Heiko, raised on my family farm, third generation. That upbringing is really important to me. It's who I am as a person. And I take those same small town values of taking care of one another to any leadership position I've ever had, most especially to the potential of being a new mayor. And I think people want to see your authenticity in leadership. They want to know that when you say something, you mean it, that you're going to lead with that honesty and integrity every single day. And they don't always have to agree with you. I've had this conversation with hundreds of people, that the beauty of if you are willing to listen and you're willing to talk about what's important to you and bring people together, even if at the end of that discussion or end of an argument, you don't agree, there's that authenticity that people need to see that you do care and that you're coming from your position in a place of what is really protecting Fort Worth families or what is best for all of Fort Worth.
Before I ask you about your priorities, you were also a chief of staff for the current mayor, Betsy Price. And so I'm wondering what that experience do you think, how does that help you?
So one small clarification is I was actually chief of staff for mayor and council, which meant I worked really closely with every council member. Fort Worth is unique. I actually reported to the city manager, but worked for mayor and council. So I got the best of all worlds, really working with city management, with residents, citizens, and with our elected officials. I think the job just uniquely prepared me because of all the issues we faced in those 5 years. Everything from pension reform to cutting the property tax rate, to dealing with really significant police community strife, the death of Tatiana Jefferson, which was a horrific event in our city that must never happen again. Reeling from the beginnings of COVID, I was still at City Hall when COVID began. The loss of Garrett Hull, one of our police officers, line of duty death while I was there. All of those things are just an example. There are many others that we went through, the Race and Culture Task Force and others, dealing with homelessness, understanding what it meant to create a strong continuum of care board. I could go on. And those issues and things that faced our community while I was chief of staff have allowed me to be an incredibly educated, knowledgeable voice on a variety of different issues, policy issues that our city needs to tackle.
And so, what are your priorities?
Sure. So I think we have to start with the bedrock of any healthy city, which is safe neighborhoods, safe community. Jack, you know better than anybody as a journalist and across North Texas what we've seen in crime rates across the United States, specifically in DFW. We've seen a double in our homicide rate in Fort Worth, and we have to take that seriously and be intentional. There was a time not too long ago when Fort Worth was known as the murder capital of the United States because our crime rate was so high. That actually created the need under Mayor Granger to create CCPD. And so Fort Worth needs to rally behind our police officers, our community members, to ensure that we put a damper on crime and take it seriously, especially violent crime in Fort Worth. Along those same lines, and that, let me be clear, that strongly means a strong support for our police officers. I understand that across the country, we are reeling and understanding what it means to tackle police community relations. But let me just be clear, defunding our police department is absolutely not the answer. And our voters in Fort Worth, mind you, just voted in CCPD for another 10 years. So what do we do with the allocation of taxpayer dollars that are funding our police departments and frankly our fire department, which are partners in public safety, to ensure they are policing what works for Fort Worth, and we're working through that, obviously led by Chief Milton Oakes. But safe neighborhoods is not just about public safety. It's also about strong neighborhoods, open space, parks, solid streets, all the things, street lighting, all the things that make a neighborhood safe, that also respect the fabric of that city. I think additional investment in our neighborhood improvement initiatives that we've had at the city for years now that started in Stop 6 need to continue with intention across the city. The second thing is economically. So in Fort Worth, we know we are not getting our fair share of large corporate relocations, and for a variety of different issues. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to be about solutions and what that looks like. So in Fort Worth, under my administration, this is what we'll do. The first thing is create a really comprehensive focus on what it looks like to attract and retain top talent. And that includes the next corporate relocations here to Fort Worth, Texas. All of your viewers could Google what's happening in Texas, the Texas Miracle, attracting California companies from the coastal cities. Why aren't we in Fort Worth competing with our peer cities? We have to take it really seriously and tell the Fort Worth story, because we have an incredible quality of life here that any company would thrive in. A big piece of that, though, is also parallel paths with large corporate relocation opportunities, is additionally supporting our small businesses and our entrepreneurs that are the bedrock, the foundation of our city. In Fort Worth, we know that we are lacking specific resources. So I've talked a lot about this with people in the last few months. We have organizations like Tech Fort Worth that are really on a shoestring budget, that are doing amazing things to incubate and grow companies in our city. We need additional resources into an institution like Tech Fort Worth, but also build probably one or two large incubator or accelerators for Fort Worth businesses. Why does that matter? Because what's happening now, Jack, is you see a small business tech entrepreneur with a fantastic idea, and they need a place to grow the idea and grow their business. So they'll oftentimes end up in a place like Austin at an organization called Techstars, where they'll grow their business, get excited, start to look about investor funding, and then take off, but they don't come back to Fort Worth, right? They end up in a place like Austin or Miami. We need to be selling Fort Worth, focus on technology innovation. Frankly, in order to do that, and it really pertains to the conversation around corporate relocation also, stop worrying about Dallas. Stop worrying about Collin County or Plano or Frisco. We need to compete on a global scale. What's happening in Berlin or London is just as important. Because of technology, we can compete at a global level, and Fort Worth needs to set itself apart in that way. What are the industries of the future that we know about? Third is, what does City Hall efficiency look like? That's a big, broad category. I think that's everything from infrastructure, bond package planning, making sure we have the best streets available to our citizens. It's also about department level. Are we really treating our residents of Fort Worth like customers, like clients, like businesses do, and making sure we have a get to yes attitude, making their lives as easy as possible every time they interface with the city. City Hall efficiency is also about how we communicate with the community. As you know, as a journalist, communication has changed. The way folks want to receive their news has changed. And if we want to meet those needs, the city has to be the premier spot where people have where our residents residents feel the information they're getting is in real time, it's quick, it's easy to understand, and they have confidence in that information. And it's not a criticism. It is really hard to learn how to communicate, especially in this on-demand culture we have. But to be honest, the city hasn't always done an excellent job in that way, especially in crisis. And we have to take that really serious responsibility if we are going to have an efficient city hall. City efficiency also leads to how property taxes are allocated. So we know that right now our tax base is upside down. And it pertains to economic development, switching from a 60% residential, 40% commercial, and flipping that. And at the same time, making sure City Hall is effectively pushing those opportunities, cutting government red tape where businesses want to come here, where residences want to live because their City Hall makes it work for them. And then the last thing is really in education, Jack, and it ties in with all of these things. We know in Tarrant County, we have to be better about investing in the talent that are in classrooms today. We can talk all day long about attracting talent from outside Fort Worth. But we owe it to our kids, to our students, to invest from cradle to career, a fantastic education pipeline for all students. So right now in Tarrant County, we know that only 23% of our students ever make it to a 2-year or 4-year credential. And if they grow up in a low-income household, it's 14%. That is a crisis, and we have to take it very seriously. And fortunately, we have wonderful partners. Some of our largest foundations and others helped me start the Tarrant 2 and 3 partnership back in April, after we traveled the country while I was still chief of staff to understand what it looks like to reform urban education. We're not about pointing fingers. We're not about blaming anybody. We're focused on getting students to and through what their pathway is. And it's not just for your university. We have wonderful partnerships with our university systems. We need to couple that with our work in elder education. I could talk a lot about this topic, but I think the mayor has a responsibility to use their bully pulpit to reform education and be partners with our ISDs, with our charter schools, with our homeschool families, with our private schools, all of them, to make sure that every single student in Fort Worth, Texas has access to a quality education from birth to career.
How do you do that without stepping on the toes of the school board?
It's all about style, Jack. You do things behind the scenes. You work really hard, and whether I'm mayor or not, I'll be focused in this issue. I have relationships with our school board members. I have relationships with school administrators across the board, across Tarrant County. And I think those relationships matter, making sure they have best practices and they have community and business support to tackle some of these tough issues. I also want to see us elevate what reform in education, what better student outcomes looks like. And we have great examples, and we're creating that structure here in Fort Worth, Texas. Again, my style is not necessarily to be on the 5 o'clock news talking about these things and what's wrong. It's not about writing an op-ed. It's about making the right relationships behind the scenes to create real change, because I'm about kids. Let the adults get out of the room, the politics, the water under the bridge. If we focus on students and student outcomes, we can do this, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be about pointing fingers, because the job of school board members, of school administrators, of our teachers, most importantly, is very difficult. You've got students that are facing a multitude of different struggles at home that they bring to school. So how do we support those school districts to provide the best education and also social emotional environments? And I know that the city has a responsibility in that, and certainly the mayor.
I just have one other question that is just a follow-up to the safe neighborhoods that you were discussing. There's also been in the last year a lot of discussion about police reform. Mm-hmm. And so I know you said before that you wholeheartedly support police officers, but what about the issue of police reform?
Sure. So first of all, we have a new police chief in Fort Worth named Chief Neil Noakes. You may have already interviewed him, I'm not sure. He's the real deal, Jack. And he is putting together the right command staff team and a focus on community relations across Fort Worth, Texas. I think as elected officials, we need to ensure that we're empowering the right leadership at the department, which we have right now, to create reforms in policing to meet the needs of community. He's already doing, and actually under Ed Krause as well, they've created programs that are working, that are quietly changing the rhetoric, changing the way we work with community members. If a community is telling you they don't trust police, then you have to believe them. And it's important that you listen to them, because you can't fight crime in a neighborhood where folks may not call police. So our police department right now are working very hard. And as your mayor, my number one responsibility is to stand arm in arm with the police chief, making sure he understands and our command staff understands what I'm hearing. And importantly, what changes they're trying to implement are supported across the community. I know there's sometimes a conversation when we talk about, a good example might be for staffing, right? Additional police officers on the street. And some people that are concerned about policing in America may say, we don't need more police officers. You actually do. If you want a return to true community policing where your neighborhood police officer knows your family, and in a smaller area, you need additional resources. At the same time, we also need to promote, and we have these programs like our HOPE team and our CIT team. They're multidisciplinary, where you're working with social workers like with an MHMR and our police officers and our paramedics, so that when you do have a tough call come in, maybe it's a mental health disturbance call and you're worried about the person you're interfacing with, maybe a police officer first off the bat is not what's needed. Police officer needed on scene to make sure things don't escalate, but utilizing an MHR caseworker is fantastic. And we already have those initiatives in the police department. And as mayor, I can't wait to support those. And I think it all ties back to police reform, Jack. That's how you change the rhetoric and the true feeling across our community about supporting our police officers, but also meeting community needs in a very diverse community.
Fort Worth mayoral candidate Mattie Parker, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jack. Thanks for having me on. Good to see you. I like those yellow chairs.